Today, we have another interview in action from the conferences that just happened down here in Miami and Orlando. My name is Bill Russell. I'm a former CIO for a 16-hospital system and creator of This Week Health, a set of channels dedicated to keeping health IT staff current and engaged. We want to thank our show sponsors who are investing in developing the next generation of health leaders: Gordian Dynamics, Quill Health, Tausight, Nuance, Canon Medical, and Current Health. Check them out at thisweekhealth.com/today. Here we go. All right, so here we are at HIMSS 2022. We're actually on the conference floor. They're doing construction, so if you hear crazy things like cranes overhead and that kind of stuff, that's what's going on. We're here with Don Rucker. Don,
Bill,
thanks. I look forward to connecting with you. We're going to talk, fire, interoperability. We'll talk a bunch of those things.
Yeah.
Last time I talked to you, you were in the administration. You've since moved on. What are you doing now?
I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at a, I guess, late stage, B-round startup called 1upHealth. So obviously, for me, having been involved in doing the interoperability rules
you would know it pretty
fire, one can imagine the incredible appeal of joining a group who's actually implementing the back end types of infrastructure you need to make fire as transformative as Congress really designed the rules to be. So very exciting.
Yeah, so 1Up focuses, this isn't a commercial for 1Up, but I'm more curious than anything. So 1Up focuses on the payer space mostly, or?
Well, we've started with the payer space and the payer-to-payer rules, and obviously payer analytics. But ultimately, it's really figuring out what do you need to make modern healthcare data extremely computable, right? So what is that? That sounds like marketing speak, right? So if you look at big data, right, the classic big data definition, nothing even to do with healthcare, is large volumes of data, high velocity of data, and lots of variety in data, right? That's the classic big data definition. So if you look at that, you're then left with, how do you actually implement that? That's, as I used to say in math class, non-trivial, right? Because whenever you have things where you need to be really fast, need to have really high volume and high variety, you're putting in things that are innately contradictory. I mean, they're just innately contradictory. What we have at 1Up is a way, in a totally scalable way in the cloud, and the cloud allows you to do these things, have combined a rich set of strategy so that we can take each element of data, compute on it individually, which is really the heart of the magic. So rather than thinking classically of a database as a series of tables and you iterate over the columns, or you go down the rows, right, the classic relational database, what we've done is we index every single piece of data as a fire resource, and then you can go to town, because the indexing allows you to put these together in any way, shape, manner, or form you want. So that can be things like, it could be classic SQL, it could be modern columnar stores for very fast comparative computation, it can be NoSQL rapidly indexing for an API for an app. All of that is really leveraging the fact that in the cloud, with storage being essentially relatively inexpensive these days, you can put search, so finding the data in real time, as your optimization. That's what really needs to power any modern big data thing, whether it's providers reaching to patients, providers analyzing data on their own, payers reaching out, any business combination.
So it's an enabler for that communication, but it's also an enabler. You could potentially, one of the challenges is we have dirty data within AI models.
Oh yeah.
Putting it down in that direction.
Right.
And I assume not the provider market yet, because the provider market is really required by the EHRs. I'm sort of doing quotes there.
Yeah.
And hopefully they will do that sometime soon. But the the fire resources should be built into the EHR by, I think, the end of this year, if not early next year.
Yes, so December 31st, not to be exact.
Not to be exact.
2022.
Not that anyone's watching.
Yeah,
Well,
not that anybody's watching. It is in the Federal Register. Yeah, so the EHRs under the Cures Act, right? So the Cures Act requirement was application programming interfaces, APIs without special effort, right? So not a vendor-specific thing. The goal there was to let patients get their data on the patient's term. Take it out of the EHR, patients could do with it what they want. So that obviously is a key component of, I think modern computing, app economy, competition, new ways of providing care. What
empowering the patient. I mean, it's the Cures Act. It's
right. Yes, empowering the patient. Right, at the patient's choice and direction. Right. If you're getting your data in a portal, you don't really have choice, right? And
I can't do anything once I get it.
Yeah,
in my
you
portal,
can hand
it's
copy it or something,
yeah.
but it's not. It's and that was what state of the art was, but now it's different. But that is really one way of the world, and obviously the bulk fires for an entire population. That the individual patient data into an app, let's say, of the patient's choice is under the HIPAA right of access. There's also bulk fire, which will be transformative in a totally different way, the bulk fire API. So same US core data for interoperability. That is a batch mode transaction under HIPAA's treatment payment operations privacy provisions. And that, for the first time, will actually allow providers or payers to really have a truly comparative view of how they're performing. Now, the providers may want to do that, let's say if you're a hospital network, between sites. Obviously, the payers and providers may want to do that jointly on shared goals. The payers may say, hey, I'm trying to negotiate a contract in network, and I would like to see how you're performing. It's that part of it, again, same data science revolution, but that uses a very modern global sense of performance. Historically, for the last 20 years, we've had these exquisitely narrow, heavily lobbied, largely, honestly, meaningless, though they were state-of-the-art at the time, things that were narrow quality measures, very burdensome to report, but they were very isolated, ultimately. Some of them were great, blood pressure control, hemoglobin A1C, those types of things. But ultimately, they're not big data. They're, teeny weeny data. And we can do better these days. So it's, how do you look at a population? And with the APIs, of course, all this can be done without burdening providers. So without having to have my notes as a doc reflect my interpretation of what some email said about quality measures, I can use the institutional and my own skills to provide the best care possible. Presumably that will show up in the overall product. So it's a very, very different view of doing data. And I think it is part of that modern way that FHIR will enable. So that's totally generic. From the 1UP point of view, the point you mentioned that's critical is how clean is the data? Everybody talks about AI, and we're here at HIMSS, and there'll probably be 50 talks on 80% of the work in AI is cleaning up the data, and 20% is on analyzing the data. Well, 1UP is really about the 80%. So instead of having all this heterogeneous data, very difficult to compute, we have a massively and subtly engineered pipeline to ingest heterogeneous data and convert it into FHIR, so that the data is
converted into FHIR.
Yes, converted into FHIR. We'll take it if it's in FHIR, but we'll also convert it into FHIR. So then, when you want to do analytics on it, the entire data set is computationally way more uniform. And we can convert claims into FHIR, we can convert clinical into FHIR. And that's one of the subtle, greatly underappreciated aspects of FHIR, is rather than having a hodgepodge of data things that almost by definition make it hard to do modern analytics, by cleaning it up front and putting it into a uniform format, you have a much better chance of getting signal out, cleaning up the data for errors, some of the health equity things, all those things require clean data.
When are the payers required to comply with the 21st Century Cures interoperability?
Well, the payers are under CMS rules, so the payers aren't directly covered by the ONC interoperability rules. The ONC interoperability rules are EMR vendors, providers, and networks.
Okay.
So unless a payer is acting, and of course increasingly payers are acting in these, payvider.
So CMS came back and said, so CMS payers
said,
have to share this data.
Same concept. We want patients to have their payer data too, as well as their provider data. So the rules were time to sync up, same concept, FHIR, bulk FHIR. So yeah, it's easy to confuse because they sort of are. I don't know. I'm not going to get into any.
It's
parentage things, but
right, same.
It's the same concept, and then as part of that, there are also some other pro-consumer efficiencies like payer-to-payer. So for example, payer-to-payer is driven by the fact that if I'm changing, let's say, the dreaded aging into Medicare, right? All of my prior auths and all of that would have been lost without a payer-to-payer interface when I change payers, right? They did all this stuff. I'm in the middle of my chemotherapy. I have to go through all of the approvals again, right? So the payer-to-payer is part of that. For payers, we're seeing some real interest because they want to know what they're getting as patients enroll. Allows them to sort of get engaged much more rapidly. And those are the rules. For payers, there's obviously, and for providers, there's a whole bigger issue, especially for payers, of what are they actually doing, right? I mean, they're listed as insurers, but they don't really do insurance in the sense that a property casualty company does insurance. They're really elaborate claims management and claims adjudication systems rather than insurance. And in that world, what data do you want? Right now, payers' spending is fairly coarse, right? Prior auth, those types of things, denials, funny network design. There's some fairly primitive tools. With modern computing, you can be vastly more targeted on how you use tools. The same way as in the consumer world, in the past, the ad hit everybody, whether that person had a prayer in the world of buying whatever you were advertising. Now, with modern analytics, all of the ads are targeted, right? Same thing on the payer side. How do you target it? Historically, they haven't really had a great ability to do that. And they're obviously population management program attempts. If you have your data in a clean, computable format, you then have a much greater chance of having targeted interventions. So the payer side, and frankly the same thing for providers, right? If you're a provider taking risk.
Yeah, I'm thinking of our clinically integrated network. We took risk, and we had to measure performance against a certain set of metrics, and we also had to provide reporting out back to the physicians. And by the way, they were all on different EMRs. So that pipe would have been really, we tried to do it through the HIE, not very effectively. And then the claims data came in, I'm trying to describe this. It's really convoluted and a really difficult problem if you're trying to do a clinically integrated network across multiple EHRs and potentially multiple payers and payer models. The data is coming to you, and then your team starts to go to work once you just get this stuff dumped. So I assume all these regs and bulk fire was meant with that in mind to say, look, I understand the consumer aspect of this. We want the consumer to have access to their data, but that clinically integrated network where people are communicating from one end to the other, providing the best care, I assume is the use case that really drives this whole thing.
Yeah, precisely. So what you've described, and the way it's sort of been for anybody who's accepting risk, is you have your claims on one side. They're not really integrated, even skipping the delays and AR days and all that kind of stuff. They're not really integrated. They don't tie together other than manually. So then your IT staff or whoever you've hired to do this, I think you get a whole new set of vendors to do stuff. But ultimately, you don't have the ability to have insights over time in what you're doing. And then because this whole process is so brittle, people quote, fix it with reporting requirements. Well, that's obviously not a fix. So if you think of this in a totally different way, which is let's ingest all the data over time, have it in highly indexed things, then you can spend your time figuring out how to improve care. You have analytics against uniform data sources, and it also allows you to do this stuff over time, which is an important issue because the data process you outlined is so challenging. It's been sort of very much of a whack-a-mole, right? I mean, I think if you look at much of population health, it's been a bit of a whack-a-mole. With modern AI techniques, LSTMs, transformers, not to get into all of the different buzzwords, but you can actually predict past to future, right? With these rich data models and rich AI tools, you can actually pick the entire trajectory of your patients at great accuracy and then target the interventions you want to do. Gives you a totally different way of looking at solving the problem. And then, you write contracts and negotiate contracts to leverage that win. And obviously in a data world, whoever's fastest and richest on the data, bobble that up, is going to be the winner.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's like high-speed trading.
Yeah, we used to have this. I worked for a provider.
Yeah, I remember you saying that. Yeah.
And we would say, essentially, when we sat across from the payers, they just had more data than we did.
So this gives you on your population. Now they obviously would have some other populations, but I don't want to use the pun "fight fire with fire" because that would be too cheap and lame, and I'm above that maybe. But yeah, it's a world, especially when so much of our network negotiation is really two large organizations going head to head, a little bit of a cage wrestling type of activity, right? It's not like a typical consumer shopping experience where there's lots of payers and lots of providers. In many markets, both the payers and the providers have bulked up, and there you can probably have much more intelligent win-win discussions as opposed to lose-lose discussions if they're informed by data.
I'm starting to hear more CIOs, others talk about bulk fire. Talk about the use cases. Where are we going to see bulk fire used?
Yeah. So what bulk fire is, to be clear, maybe I'll give a little history because I think that'll. So when I got to ONC as national coordinator in 2017, I was frankly somewhat surprised. To quote Humphrey Bogart, shocked actually, to find out that the fire data standards were only for one patient at a time. It had never occurred to me that somebody would do a database and only retrieve one record at a time. That was like so stunningly non-performant, let's call it. I was looking for a plate.
Lacked foresight.
Well, it was what it was. So I'm talking with Ken Mandel, Boston Children's. He pointed this out to me and said, hey, we should do something about it. And so we came up, and I would have, if I had known that bulk was going to be the name that stick with it, maybe I would have had something more harmonious, but bulk actually describes it. So, I was told maybe you should have called it population level data or something, but at any rate, it's bulk fire now in the rule and the standards. But the concept is really pretty simple, which is we want to look at the data on a population and not just one patient. Now, that's the exact same fire data elements, the U.S. core data for interoperability, the EHR vendors already had to clean up and transform into fire for the individual right of access. So minimal work, right? The heavy lifting already done, but so then you just have to have a specification of what's the population. The nature of getting that data is under HIPAA's treatment payment operation. So that's a batch mode. It's not real time like the individual right of access. And it's negotiated, right? The payer and provider, let's say if it's payer provider, could be, we heard, when I was at ONC, I heard a number of large providers couldn't even get their own data because of contracts they'd signed, somewhat stunningly, frankly. But whoever it is, if it's providers, obviously they have a right to their data. This lets them look at it, put whatever tools they want. If it's a payer-provider network, obviously that has to be agreed to. Today they're often like one-off downloads of some SQL report that you can't really do much with, which maybe is the intent of it. So you have a population that you've defined, that you have a legal right to by contract under covered entities business associate provisions of HIPAA. The power of it comes because as the U.S. core data for interoperability, it's a uniform data set. So you can use off-the-shelf tools, you can have off-the-shelf reporting, off-the-shelf analytics. It's right, instead of wiring your appliance into the wall, there's a plug. And the plug is uniform on both sides, the plug and the socket. We have never had that for any type of population data in healthcare. Imagine we're in 2022 in America spending vast numbers of dollars, and we've never had a uniform way of analyzing population performance of data. Pretty stunning when you think about it, right? Yeah. So now, with bulk fire, we have that way, and I think it'll enable lots of, analysis, AI, ML, all of these tools everybody talks about. I think they actually become practical because now you have data that is uniform. If you go with somebody like us, you can have it be really homogeneous, pre-processed, and clean. But one way or the other, we can do actually all data, not just the U.S. core data. But you're going to have a start at a much richer and more reliable performant analytics.
U.S. CDI.
Yeah.
U.S. core data. You keep saying it.
Yes.
It is full. U.S. CDI. Where do you want to see that go next? What data sets do you want to see that tackle next?
Yeah. So for the audience, U.S. CDI used to be called the Common Data Set, is really the basics of describing a patient. I sometimes describe it as if it's change a shift, and I'm describing a patient that I'm taking care of to whoever's taking over for me or vice versa. It's the basics of the history, the medication list, the problem list, the allergies. It has the notes, so it's more than that.
It's essentially the PAM.
It has some provenance now. The U.S. version 1, version 2 is, the current O&C is putting some other things into that, from maybe more politically driven. But the U.S. core data set, the initial one, is really just that basic description of a patient with provenance on who did it. Interestingly, the Europeans are doing something almost identical.
Are they really?
Yep. So in the European Union, there's a couple subtle differences, but almost identical. And it's that basic data that really defines a patient.
It's interesting. Wow. So you're gonna your chief strategy officer. What are you going to do here at HIMSS? What are you looking forward to seeing? It's been a while since we've been together. It's
HIMSS is always a interesting event to see. People's view of the world, to hear what people are doing. It's with the power of modern computing. I mean, the variety of what is being done by folks attending and exhibiting and speaking at HIMSS gets larger every year. So it's a pretty exciting type of thing, especially if you're a nerd.
Absolutely. Don, thank you for your time.
Bill, thank you very much.
Much
appreciated.
Another great interview. I want to thank everybody who spent time with us at the conferences. It is phenomenal that you shared your wisdom and your experience with the community, and it is greatly appreciated. We also want to thank our channel sponsors who are investing in our mission to develop the next generation of health leaders: Gordian Dynamics, Quill Health, Tausight, Nuance, Canon Medical, and Current Health. Check them out at thisweekhealth.com/today. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.